Well, good afternoon on this nice sunny day. Today we've got a special project we're going to do. We're going to take Phoenix. He has a stock exhaust on it, and what we're going to do is we're going to give him a new one. I got one that came in from England. It's by a company called Motad, and I think it's going to look really nice on him. We start out with some nice stainless steel headers. And we're going to end up with this gorgeous, gorgeous chrome stainless steel end. So that's our project today. We're going to be replacing the muffler. Before I do it, I'm going to shut things down for a moment. I'm going to go into the bike cave so we have more controlled environment for lighting and sound. But before you replace an exhaust on any bike, there's one little thing you should do. Record the sound of your old exhaust and then record the new one and compare the difference. To do this, I've made sure my camera is set to manual audio. Because cameras typically have automatic gain control, so when you get louder, it's going to cut down the volume. So I've got the automatic gain control set at a certain level. When we do the tutorial inside the bike cave, I'm going to flip it back to auto. When we come back out after we're done and test the new exhaust, it's going to be set to exactly the same audio level, and the camera will be in about exactly the same position. That'll be probably an hour, 2 hours from now. It takes a little longer to change an exhaust when you're doing a video tutorial because you're going to be changing scenes and cameras and taking breaks. But in reality, you could change an exhaust by yourself on your bike in about a half hour. So let's fire him up. I've warmed him up so that we're going to have a good basis of the sound level. You should always check your bike with the bike warmed up so you know it's running the way it normally is going to run. It always sounds a little bit different when you first start it up and when it's cold. About 4,000 RPM where I normally would be riding. And there's idle. Right now it's at about 1,400. Okay. Well, I'm going to shut down, move into the bike cave, get set up, and we're going to start changing the exhaust. I'll give them a few moments to cool down. One suggestion, if you're in a cold environment, warm your engine up a little bit. What that's going to do is expand the head, and the bolts will be just a little bit looser. As it gets really cold, that aluminum tightens and clamps around those bolts and can make them very hard to get off. I will have to let it cool for a moment because the headers right now are extremely hot, and I don't want to be putting my hands around there and playing with that, even with gloves on. So let's get into the bike cave now. And let's change the exhaust on Phoenix to a nice chrome stainless steel exhaust from the United Kingdom. And before you begin your project, organize everything and be sure you have all the tools and equipment that you need. You don't want to be halfway through putting a muffler on your bike, suddenly find you're missing a bolt, or anti-seize or something else that's important, then have to stop. Well, if your bike's not running, it makes it kind of hard to get down to the parts store to pick up what you need. So I've got my set of wrenches. I'm going to need those to put the bike together. I've got my Allen wrenches. I need those to get the header bolts off, and I may need it on some of the other bolts. Two important things. I've got new gaskets. I happen to go with OEM. You can go with aftermarket gaskets. Just get good gaskets, and anytime you replace a muffler, put new gaskets on. It's very important for a good seal. I have a tube of anti-seize. Anti-seize is put on the threads of your muffler bolts for the header so that next time you want to take them off, they're not going to be rusted tight. I have my instruction sheet. I have the bracket that came with the muffler. I have the bolts that came with the muffler. I have my R&G muffler guards. They come in the nice little box. You may think they're not necessary, but I find it worth it. If your bike falls over, they're going to prevent your muffler from being scratched. And while you're working on your muffler and having to set it down, it's not going to scratch your muffler because you're on a rough surface. The muffler guards are going to take all the impact. And for those with different size mufflers, the muffler guards come in a couple of different sizes. They have smaller ones, they have larger ones, they have oval ones, they have triangular ones for different sizes of mufflers. They mount simply with a metal band around the back of the muffler, and to protect the muffler, they also come with this piece of rubber that you put underneath the band that'll protect the muffler from getting scratched. So I have my tools. I've got my R&G frame sliders. I have my muffler. Another important thing is have a good surface to work on as you're working on your muffler. I have the nice neoprene pad. A sheet of foam will work. As you set your muffler down, you don't want to get it scratched on the pavement or on the dirt. Also, have yourself a bunch of towels and some rubber gloves to keep the grease off of yourself. You might want some leather gloves if you're working around the engine and it's still a little bit warm. One thing this muffler does, in many mufflers, the clamps do not come off. But as I'm working on it and these things sliding up and down, they might scratch my muffler. So as a startup precaution, as I'm working on things, I'm going to take these clamps and I'm just going to put a little bit of painter's tape around here so they're not going to slide down. Mr. Tape decided he wanted to roll onto the floor. So we pick him back up, turn it over. Notice I am on my surface. I've got a sheet of neoprene I bought off of eBay. An old wetsuit is great. You can cut that up and use that as a tank protector because the shape of a wetsuit kind of fits a tank. You cut the sleeves and zippers off. Okay, this is going to be ready to go. I have one thing I'm going to do first, and that is I'm going to set this down out of the way in a safe place so it won't get scratched. I'll bring over my nice shiny new Motad muffler. I'm going to be putting on my R&G frame sliders, or engine bars. And these will go on by slipping on and then tightening the clamp. I put one at the back end, and I like one at the front end. Because as your bike falls over, the front end is going to be one area that's going to take the impact, and it just looks cool to have one at the front and one at the back. For that, I'll need a socket or a screwdriver, but I'm just going to go ahead and put that on, and then we'll come back after I get the muffler guards on. Well, I did it. I got the R&G muffler guards on, and they actually look pretty good. The muffler actually goes this way. When I put them on, I made sure they both balanced pretty good. To tighten them up, I did use a number 8 socket. The only thing left now is to cut these off, but I think I'll leave this for a little bit in case I need to adjust it or take it off again, and I'll cut it as I near completion of my project. This muffler is a 2-piece muffler. So there's muffler part, and as you saw, there was the header part that mounts onto the engine. These are kind of nice. They're easy to work with. You can take one end off and not the other. They're also easier to ship. It's kind of irrelevant whether you have a 2-piece muffler or a 1-piece. This Motad muffler matches the OEM muffler in one regard, so that it has a small little bracket here where a rubber bumper goes. This rubber bumper is the stop for the center stand when it swings up so it doesn't smack against the frame. I happen to have an extra bumper. It didn't come with the bumper. I have an extra one, and it just twists into the little hole right there, and there it is. If it didn't come with one, or I didn't have an extra bumper, you can take the bumper off of your existing muffler when you remove it. It just simply pulls out and stick it in. Some other mufflers, like Vance and Hines, do not have this type of a stop for the center stand. The Vance and Hines has a metal bracket that mounts onto a center stand bolt. It must be put on before you put on the muffler, because you can't get that center stand bolt out with the muffler in place. Many people forget to do that because they don't know what this little metal bracket is for, and the Vance and Hines does not have very good instructions on how it goes on. But as you can see from my pictures, it is pretty straightforward in how it goes on and how it functions. So study those pictures. I've also posted them on GS Twins, and they're also in my photo bucket page on GS Twins. If you click on my little signature, you'll get to my photo bucket page with all kinds of pictures, wiring diagrams, hose routings, technical diagrams, tons of stuff on the GS500. Well, now that we've got the RNG frame sliders on, there's one more thing we should put on before we move on to the bike. There's this bracket that holds the exhaust onto the bike. So we've got a rubber bumper on. Let's put this on. And the way it goes is it bends up and over the exhaust. Slide 2 bolts in the slot. Add a little thread lock onto them. Thread lock a little bit thin there. Let's wipe that up. Keep our work area neat. Now the bracket has slots so it can be adjusted up, down, left, and right. We're going to finger tight the nuts so that we can still move it once we position this on the bike. So once we go on the bike, we may need to move this around in order to get everything to fit correctly. Remember, this is a 2-piece. It's where the ends slip together, and we don't want to put tension on this end when we slide it onto the part that connects to the headers. That'll affect the fitting of the headers if we've got force on it. So this has to gently go on, and we adjust this so everything sits really, really perfect. There's one last bolt that goes on it, and this is a bolt that goes on the end over here, which is used to tighten the 2 halves of the muffler together. So when the muffler is on the bike, the headers slide in and this bolt tightens. So it can rotate a little bit, it can go in and out a little bit. We have this bracket that moves up, down, left, and right. So this section of the muffler should gently attach to this end, which is going to be fastened onto the engine here. And this end we don't want to torque or twist, because that'll affect the fit of the engine, and if it's torqued or twisted, we can do a couple things. We can break a header bolt, we could not get a good seal, and exhaust gases could leak out, and worst case, we could cause damage to our head. Our parts are ready, and now we're going to move on to removing the old exhaust off of the bike. It's time to take off the 4 bolts that hold the muffler onto the front of the engine. Your 4 header bolts. These can be a little tight to get to, but the outer ones are usually pretty easy to get to. Now, one thing that I have personally found when it comes to bolts that are stuck, and these probably are, if you simply push, you're going to break off the head. But if you give it a little rap, or a tap with a hammer or something, kind of like the impact wrench thing, a quick shock to it will break the rust. That's why impact wrenches work so well. The pounding, the impact breaks the rust and breaks things free, where if you just push, you're going to rip the thread. So I'm going to give a little tap, and it's loose. Now I'll loosen it just a little bit more. And I've got one loose. This one I'll take out completely. Being my first one, I want to show you what is on there. And you'll see on the threads some of this silver gunky stuff. That's the anti-seize, which helps keep it from rusting so that I can get it out. Now I'm going to move around to the other side, take one off. And after I take one off the other side, I'm going to work in the middle. Okay, now with all four of the front bolts off, I'm going to move on to the back. One little word of caution. When I took off a couple of the bolts here on the front, they were not on very tight. This exhaust was put on a couple weeks ago. One thing you need to do after putting on a new exhaust is check these bolts regularly. As the engine heats up and cools down, the bolts will work loose a little bit. The gaskets will compress down a little bit. So you want to keep an eye on these for a while to make sure that they are in there tight and they're not going to work their way loose. Now let's go to the back of the bike, take off the back bolt, and we should be ready to remove our muffler. To remove this, I'm going to need two number 12 wrenches. On your bike, it might not be the same. You might have different bolts. So use whatever is necessary. It's this bolt right here. There's a nut on the back, bolt on the front, and it goes through a rubber bushing to hold it in place. Number 12 there. Number 12 there. There it is. Now when you're working around a new exhaust, and even this one is in good shape, be careful with your wrenches. Now, our muffler is ready to come off. I pull the bolt out, I cradle the muffler. Now, notice I've got a pad down here. This time it happens to be a big piece of white foam. This is so I've got something to set it on and not damage it. And when I put my new one on, I've got something to protect it as I'm setting it down and putting it up into place. The back is off, it moves up and down. I will wiggle slightly. Forward come off, and there it is. And there is our exhaust. It's now off. This is the back side. I'm going to carefully set it down on the cement on the floor. I wouldn't do that on the front, but I do have the RNG muffler guards on it. Now, if I only had one set, now I could take these off and move them to my other muffler, but I happen to have two sets of RNG muffler guards, so that's why I put them on the other muffler ahead of time. Remember I mentioned the bumper. Okay, here's that bumper that is the cushion for your center stand. If I didn't have a spare, I would now take this one off and move it to my other muffler. Or if I have a Vance & Hines exhaust, the center stand bolts are free, and so I can take off the one center stand bolt and put that bracket on. So, I'll put this away, I'll get out my new muffler, and let's put on a new muffler. Earlier, I made mention of the fact that anytime you replace a muffler, you should put on new gaskets. This is especially critical in this situation because I'm putting on a completely different muffler. The gaskets, the headers are not going to seat the same at all. If I was taking off my muffler, maybe to change the oil, and put it right back on, I might be able to get away without changing the gaskets. It's not a good idea to do that, but in a pinch, you could get away with that, especially in this bike right now because the muffler has only been on for a couple weeks, so the gaskets are still relatively new. So I take my gaskets out of my case. I need to remove the old one. For that, you want a little pick, small screwdriver, and they may be hard to see. If you look in here, it's going to look a lot like the carbon on the inside of the head. Because of that, sometimes people don't remove them and they just simply go and add another one on. You end up with way too many gaskets. It ends up with a bad situation. So be very careful not to scratch anything. These are new gaskets that have only been on a short time, so they're coming out real easy. Old gaskets can be really, really compressed, and they can be very, very hard to get out. These still have a lot of compression. They're almost brand new. I wouldn't recommend it, but I'm going to put these in my toolbox as emergency spares. Because they are so new and have only been used for a few weeks, these might still be usable. But I am going to put new gaskets in, and I will slip those in, and it'll stay there on its own for a little while. Now I'll reach over and get the other one. Here it is. It also looks very, very new. I'll take my package, open up my gasket, and slide that in. Now, I'm ready to put the header on this engine, and then once we put the header on, we'll move on and do the back part. I'm not doing anything about the center stand bracket because this muffler is like stock. If I was putting on a Vance & Hines, I would want to put on that center stand bracket, and I've shown you some pictures of what that looks like, and you do have to get down underneath the bike in order to put that on. So let me grab my head. I've got my 4 bolts. I'm going to get everything ready, and we're going to put on the head, or the headers, and get started on this muffler. And we should be done in, well, probably 5 minutes. Okay, I'm over here ready to put it on. I'm going to leave my tape on here just so that these don't slide down and scratch this up. I want to keep it pretty nice. There are a few blemishes on it just for manufacturing, but they're pretty minor and they're on the inside. I don't want the outside to get all scratched up. Oh, I'm going to take my anti-seize, get my bolts ready. Rub a little anti-seize on my bolts. Lay my bolts down so they're ready to go, all 4 of them. And all 4 of these bolts are good. I put on not new bolts, but really, really good used bolts when I put the other exhaust on Phoenix after actually building him up completely from a bare frame. It was quite an experience. So we have some anti-seize on there. I'll put a little bit up around the head to squish around. This stuff will be a little messy. We'll wipe it off the excess after we're done so we don't have silver everywhere. Unfortunately, Phoenix is all silver, so it may not look that bad. Yes, the bike cave is out in the back of my yard. Neighbors are doing their lawn, so I ignore a little bit of the noise. I usually try to do my little GS videos when things are pretty quiet. For those of you on GS Twins, this is one of the billet covers that Chuck 81 makes. Absolutely gorgeous. I painted it with a Suzuki silver paint and left the middle bare aluminum. I would like to find the correct paint that matches the engine case exactly. I haven't seen a spec on that, but I have a spare cover I can take to a paint shop and find one that matches, and then I'll repaint to match. But it actually looks pretty good. It might have been interesting to leave it silver and do the S in black, but oh, that's the beauty of it. We can always change it by taking the paint off. Strip it and repaint it. Okay? We are now going to fit this up where it belongs. I've already got my gaskets in, so my gaskets are okay. Fit him up. And there he goes. Now, the tricky part. This is where it can be handy to have two people, but I'm going to hold it with one hand. I'm going to put one bolt in to keep it in place. Finger tight. Okay, with one bolt in, it's not going to fall out. Now I'll reach, do another bolt. It's a little tricky on this exhaust because you don't have a lot of hand space in there. So I'll make use of my Allen wrench to get it started. We all owe Allen a debt of gratitude for making such a nice little wrench. Yeah, I think his friend was Philip, because Philip made some nice screwdrivers. Okay, those are finger tight. I'm going to go over to the other side now, tighten those up, and get them really, really snug, because I don't want this to move as I'm putting on the back end of the exhaust. So give me about 2 minutes to put those on, and then we'll set up and we'll put on the back end of the muffler. Well, I'm going to play stupid and have grease on my face. I never put this up on the center stand. I should have put the bike on the center stand before I took the muffler off, because remember, this center stand has a bumper that holds it. I realized it when I went to just check the fit of this before we started up again, and realized, oops, center stand. So let's put Phoenix up on the center stand in my little handy way of doing it. There's a video on this, because I'm a little guy, so it's hard for me to reach out here and have good leverage, and I have one leg with a bad Achilles tendon. It's healed, but the muscle isn't strong enough yet for me to apply a lot of force if things are going that way and keep myself from falling over with a bike. I grab on the side, just right around the area of the petcock where the frame has a diagonal brace, rock it up, guiding it with my forearm, holding on here. And this again is so if it falls that way, I can pull it back, and it's not going to fall this way because I'm standing here. I'm on the center stand, square, and now I lift up and back, simple deadlift, up and back, and there he is on the center stand. Now we can continue. You know, and also, look at these gorgeous hands. Forgot to put on my rubber gloves. Well, they're dirty now, I'm going to continue, but use rubber gloves and protection so you can keep your hands a little bit cleaner, so people don't say, what do? Work on motorcycles all your life? Okay, we're now going to put this guy on. All right, let's put this on. You know, we're almost finished. Believe me, this is surprisingly fast. I have my bolt that goes through the frame to hold the muffler. I have that in place. I have the nut that goes on the back. My bracket is still loose because I'm not really sure what the position of it is going to be. So I will tighten this once I get it on. Make sure that's loose. There we go. Okay, so our bracket is loose, so we'll swing up and down. And let's now slide it on. This is loose. We'll come under here, we'll slide on, being careful not to put a lot of torque on the exhaust. Wiggle it a little bit. We've got the bolt in. As a safety, I will put the nut on the back with a little bit of thread lock. I'm a firm believer in thread lock. Okay, it's on loose. Now, I just need to slide this in as much as possible. And that's why this has so many positions for sliding, so that we can get it on and then slide it forward, and as we slide this forward, the bracket slides back. Now, I seem to be on about as tight as I can be. Now we turn this back the way it belongs. Okay, that is good. That's good. Really, all I have left to do now is just tighten things up. I have this to tighten. It's a little bit tight. I use an extension so I don't scratch. Okay, that bracket is tight. Now I just have to tighten the bolts down here and tighten the bolt under here that clamps these two pieces together. Recheck my bolts there, and we're going to be ready to go. So that's kind of boring to watch. So let me take a minute or two to do that. We'll come back and we're going to fire up Phoenix, and we're going to actually see what this nice shiny stainless steel Motad exhaust sounds like. Be back in a minute. Well, we've done it. We've got the exhaust on. We're going to fire it up. One last word. If you look in your service manual, the exhaust pipe bolts are supposed to be tightened to 6.5 to 8.5 foot-pounds. I did not check that with a torque wrench, but I'll do that later. I have all the other bolts tightened up. Let's take them off the center stand. Works just fine. And let's fire them up. Well, I don't know if it's good or better. It's definitely a little bit richer, a little bit throatier. I'll violate all safety rules and I'll just ride up the alley about 20 feet just to see how he sounds and come back. Anyway, this is Adidas guy showing you how easy it is to change your muffler, put on a new one. This is a Motad muffler out of the UK. Same applies to whatever muffler you're putting on. Ride safe and don't do what I'm doing, always ride with your gear. Well, I like it. A little bit throatier sound, a little bit deeper. That's it for today. We changed the muffler.